Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you for coming. We're going to share with you some of our work on climate change adaptation, but in a very specific way on how we work, how we do all of our work at the University of Vermont through an agroecological lens and using participatory action research. So I'm Ernesto Mendez. I'm a professor at UVM, and I lead this community of practice called Agroecology and Livelihoods Collaborative. And I'm happy that two of my colleagues are here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
So, hi everybody. My name is Vic Izzo. I'm, traditionally trained as an entomologist, but over the course of the last 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, I've become what I'd like to consider myself an agroecologist, whereby I'm kind of not looking at it from a single lens. And we've talked a lot about lenses here at Stone Barns in the last couple of days, and so that diversity of lenses has really led itself to me being here today to talk to you. And I'm originally from Mayapack, so I'm originally from not very far from here, for those of you that are from the Hudson Valley. So I love this place. So anyways.
My name is Alisha Utter, and I'm also originally from the Hudson Valley. I'm a PhD student at the University of Vermont in the Plant and Soil Science Department and a member of the ALC. Ernesto is my advisor. Also, I'm a beginning farmer. I farm in Grand Isle, Vermont, regenerative agriculture perennial fruits. So I'll be sharing some with that hat on today.
All right, so often in all the spaces that I educate in, I like to do a little mindfulness exercise to bring everyone kind of bring their presence to this talk now. So if everyone closes their eyes, take a deep breath. So today, we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about how we envision adaptation as our group, the ALC, and how we use a specific type of process that allows for kind of a more integrative approach to adaptation in the face of climate change. And we're going to do a little bit of a group work with you guys, so this is not a kind of a unidirectional educational experience. So you will be participating. So thank you for joining this class. Welcome to class.
Great. So one of the things that is really important to us in the ALC and that has come up here in the conference is the intentionally trying to bring different voices. So the three of us have very different perspectives in all of the work that we do. And it's great to have Alisha, who's a farmer too. So we want to share our perspective from those different positions on the same topic. So this is what we're intending to do. I'm tempted, because I always like to change the program, to just ask people, since we're a small group and that's something to cherish, name and where they're from. Can we just do that real quick? Okay, great. And I didn't say it, but I'm originally from El Salvador, and now I live in Vermont. So we're going to just tell you a little bit about us and how we do our work, and then we're going to share some examples of the work that we've done, really as related to climate change, and then we're going to engage you in a group activity to come back and finalize with some discussion and questions. So the ALC is, I like to say that we're a community of practice, which is basically just a group of people that intentionally get together because they believe that together you're going to learn more than on your own. And all of our research is focusing on agroecology and participatory action research with a broad food systems focus. So we have people working in the fields, in agriculture, and others looking at broader food system issues. We do a lot of different teaching and training, undergraduate level, graduate level at the University of Vermont, but we also engage in training courses in the US and also internationally. And I like to put all these logos here because collaboration is one of our stronger values. We don't believe that you can solve a lot of the issues we've been discussing in this conference if you don't collaborate with others. And doing it with humility and understanding that we have these different worldviews, right? That Ricardo was talking about at the first day. I showed this the first day, and this is just a reminder, how we perceive agroecology as having expressions in science, social movement, and practice. And we really try to engage in all of these. This green little sweet spot is so hard to get in, right? Because I'm trained as a scientist, and I will say that for me, the hardest part has been like engaging more in the social movement. Given my personal history growing up in a civil war, there's a fear of movements and all that. The practice that comes from the farmers. So we really are trying our best to cross those borders, to reach out and work together so that in all of our work, we take into account each three of these. Participatory action research is a way to do that because it calls for doing everything very intentionally and with a lot of humility, and also valuing and respecting all the different partners that are involved. So breaking down those hierarchical barriers of the academic or the scientist or the expert is the one that knows most, but actually saying, we all have some knowledge to bring to bear to a process, and also being transparent about what are the benefits of that process. So I've done a lot of research in my career, and sometimes you have to be honest and tell your farmer partner, I don't really know what you're going to get out of this. And the farmer partner can then say, well, actually, if we're unsure, then maybe I won't participate. Or say, well, how about if we do this, if we negotiate a little bit, and can you tweak this a little bit so I can get something tangible out of the process? So this is a process that when it works well, it can yield a lot of positive outcomes for all the partners, but it's not an easy process. It usually takes a long period of time. It forces you to address some of the issues that have been coming up here of power dynamics, issues like race. I'm a Latino scientist in one of the whitest states in the country. Those are issues that will come up here. If you want to develop relationships of trust, it's really hard to do if you don't address those. And successful processes, which is what we're trying to do, is when you've achieved this trust between the partners, and the partners can actually be honest and say, I don't really like in these reflection phases, the way the research was done here, can we change it a little bit? Or what I've had happen to me in my research with coffee farmers in the tropics is farmers changing their priorities and saying, we've been working a lot on coffee, now we need to work on food security and food production. So we try to be pretty flexible in these types of processes. Okay, Vic.
So in that context, Ernesto told me that we were going down to Stone Barn. I guess it was a couple months ago. I'm a big storyteller, so bear with me. So he told me that we were going down to talk about climate change adaptation. And to me, the idea of climate change adaptation is such a huge bear to deal with, and certainly in an hour and a half, and certainly in a portion of an hour and a half program. And so as I was sitting thinking about this, because we certainly work with people in Vermont that are seeing specific effects centered around climate change, right? And those changes are certainly a part of a kind of a mixed bag, right? There's an unpredictability and a really difficult way to say, here's a suite of strategies that you need to use to adapt to climate change. And so as I sat with this, I thought maybe it might be more effective to kind of talk about kind of a more integrated approach and how we kind of deal with the unpredictability in farms, and especially how that unpredictability is moving forward. And so I'm going to tell you a little about the story about kind of what I do and what we do as part of the ALC. And I'm going to use a little bit of an example of how we apply a different approach that I would say is kind of an integrated climate change adaptation approach. And we'll see if you believe me. So it's might say a V part. We started this collaborative. This is my research partner, Scott Lewins, who works at St. Michael's College. He's an entomologist. So I have to, we both, if I'm going to talk about being an entomologist, I have to show you doing entomology. Essentially, this is him doing some monitoring out in an onion field, and this is me in an urban environment in Mexico sampling Colorado potato beetle. And the reason why I show both of these pictures is because it kind of tells a little bit of a story about kind of how I approach this idea of changing systems and how we adapt to those changing systems. So at my heart, I'm really an evolutionary ecologist. Okay, so this word adaptation means a lot to me. My dissertation was based upon the Colorado potato beetle. So how many people have heard of the Colorado potato beetle? Okay, how many people love the Colorado potato beetle? I love the Colorado potato beetle. The reason why I love the Colorado potato beetle is because the Colorado potato beetle is an adaptive marvel. It's originally from central Mexico. It is not a pest in central Mexico. It has been able to adapt to live not only in temperate ecosystems that obviously have expanded up northward, but it has adapted to over 250 different insect pesticide chemistries over the course of maybe since 1850, so whatever, 150 years, 160 years, okay? And so the model of that idea of what were the strategies that beetle used to adapt to these different environments, I learned that there was tons of different things that it adapt to. And it wasn't one single strategy, it was kind of a combination of many different strategies. It's whether it was overwintering, digging into the ground. It was whether it was kind of feeding on certain plants. The cool thing about this beetle too is that it actually uses the plant when it first moved northward to identify changes in the plant's physiology to indicate that it should overwinter. So before, because it lives in central Mexico originally, right? So anyway, so all this stuff was going on in my mind, and I was thinking, wait a second, I'm going to talk about adaptation. What the hell is adaptation? Okay? So I'm going to ask people, what is adaptation? Does anyone want to kind of give me some idea, some definition of how you define adaptation?
Adaptation is the ability for one species to adapt to changes in its environment.
Okay, so the ability to a species to change in response to its environment, right? I love it. It's a great definition. Anyone want to add anything else to that definition? Nothing? Anyone? Anyone have any other?
For survival.
For survival, okay. Does it have to be for survival? Or a benefit, okay. This is kind of horizontal, that. These are all correct. These are all right. I don't actually ask questions when I have the complete correct answer. I don't like those kind of questions. Anything else you want to add to this? This is like a group exercise of defining adaptation. So I call this, so this is completely right. When in my field, or at least from the evolutionary ecology field, I often call this to increase fitness, okay? So it's specific traits, this is how I define it, it's specific traits that a species evolves, or it doesn't have to necessarily be a species, it could be any type of a population, right? Evolves a specific trait that allows for it to increase its fitness. So what do I mean by fitness in this case? Health in one case. What else? Well, how else might I kind of record fitness as? Where are my ecologists?
Weathering change or different environments, being able to survive in different situations.
Right, so being able to survive. So this whole survival thing. From an evolutionary perspective, we simply say being able to have lots of babies. Because that means that trait is going to go into the next generation, right? Does that make sense? And so when I was thinking about this, when we talk about climate change adaptation, how can we create ways as farmers to increase our fitness in the face of change, right? So that's essentially the basic idea. That's when we're talking about adaptation. So as I kind of sat with this whole idea, what is the single trait that we need to use? So if we're thinking about a species, all of a sudden the kind of the quintessential adaptation, Darwin's finches, right? So many of you know this. So they landed to these islands. There's different seeds. That was the trait that changed was the beak change, right? So that trait led to them being more successful, increasing their fitness. But as we know, with climate change, there's no one specific trait that's going to change, right? So there's not one specific environmental factor that's going to change that's going to lead to one specific trait that we need to change. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you, this is climate change. If this happens, you need to do this on your farm. That's not an effective way to succeed in the face of a very highly integrated environment that's changing in so many ways that we can't deal with it. And that's what a lot of people come to me when they say you do climate change research. They want to know exactly what they want to do on their farm that's going to make them less susceptible. And I'm saying it's really not what you're just singularly going to do on your farm. It's how you're going to actually use the information and integrate with other people and things that are going to make your farm have greater fitness. Does that make sense? And so it brings me back to kind of how I really started this new type of process to help farmers deal with climate change or any type of environment. This is a farmer that I work quite closely with. Our group works quite closely with. This is Andy Jones from the Intervale. And the Intervale happens to be situated in a place that's a floodplain, essentially. And so they are dealing consistently with these ideas of climate change. And it's it's not just flooding. It's kind of variability in their fields. It's variability in environment, how often flooding, where flooding is going to happen. And so what he said to us when we went to him, he sat down with us and he said, just like he says here, it's like the problem really isn't the fact that climate change is so much the problem. There's new things that are happening that we don't have enough information for. And we need new strategies and we need them to happen quickly. Okay? And that's what he really sat down. So how many people here are farmers? Okay. How many people here have worked with a researcher before? How many people here have had dinner with a researcher before? How many people here have designed an experiment together with a researcher here? How many people actually brought the experimental design to the researcher? So it tends to, and this is the process I'm talking about. So as myself as a researcher, when I originally did my research, I talked to Andy and I said, oh, you're having all these problems with flooding and specifically a bug that I'm going to talk about in a second called the leek moth. I said to him, I got some ideas on what you can actually, a climate change adaptation strategy or a strategy to use on your farm. Here's the experiment. Here's how we should do it. And he said, even if that was true, if you gave me this strategy to do it, I would never do that. I don't have time to go out and monitor every single day. I don't have the money to be spraying what you're saying. And plus, if I actually do that as much as you're saying, it's essentially going to be useless because I'm going to be spending all my time on my onions. It's not going to be worth it. So I went back to the drawing board and I came back with something else, or we came back with something else. And then we decided, why don't we ask Andy for some questions? Why don't we ask Andy what might be something feasible? And so this idea led to kind of how we kind of been working on a project. So I'm going to fly through this too quickly because I'm already probably over time. So I'm good? Yeah. So this brings me to kind of, it's not necessarily a climate change problem, but it's certainly associated with it. Part of the reason why Andy and many farmers in the region have been coming to our group is to talk about, specifically our entomology group, to talk about some new invasive pests. There's several new invasive pests in Vermont that are basically coming down from Canada and causing lots of issues. And one of those is called the leek moth. And I'll talk about the history of the leek moth in a second. But the way it was actually identified was one year a farmer went into their storage onions, opened up the area that they were. I forget where they had it stored in. And it was like bats in a belfry. A bunch of leek moth came flying out of nowhere. And this was completely new to them. They didn't know what was actually going on, and they wanted to know more about it. So the leek moth is a moth that feeds on alliums. It's a major pest of leeks, essentially. They pretty much have rendered growing leeks organically really difficult in Vermont. And then, of course, of onions and garlic. And when we came to start to research the leek moth, we found out that the leek moth actually has been in Ontario since 1993. And as movement and as kind of environmental change started to happen, they started to move southward to Plattsburgh, New York in 2009. And it wasn't until 2012 until it was actually identified in Vermont, in the islands in the northwest part of Vermont. Okay? And so what we started to do very quickly was, what is a type of strategy that could help farmers, right? And so we sat down with a bunch of farmers. The reason why I asked you that question with regards to have you sat down, have you had dinner with a farmer, is that we actually started to go out and vet what are the issues with leek moth. Is it even worth it? Because we had a couple of farmers telling us that they were interested in it, but we really wanted to have an idea of what was kind of the entire distribution of this insect and what was the problems. Were there serious problems? So we sat down with probably like 5 or 6 farmers over the course of a year and a half. We ran several different types of information sessions, getting information primarily from farmers, asking them, is this worth it to work on? And if it is worth it to work on, what type of strategies are you interested in? And currently, what strategies are you using? And the amazing thing was they were asking us a bunch of questions on leek moth, and we didn't know much about it. Because we're like, we're not going to start investigating this, because we weren't experts on it. We didn't know much about it. But we weren't going to go down a road of investigating something if we didn't have people that actually were bought in to this process. And so what we identified was in the first year of this is the islands up here. This should be like kind of a lake. Grand Isle is up here. This is the first area in which we saw it in 2012. It is now, in the last 4 years, has extended itself all the way down to the southern parts of Rutland County. So it's moving pretty quickly. We've now measured to move about, I think it's something like 15 miles, I guess it was, per year, I think is what we were identifying it currently. I think that's what Scott said. But in the face of climate change, we then did a Climax model with a collaborator up in Canada, and we pretty much identified the possible expansion of that moth from the region of Vermont to very favorable conditions basically through the entire eastern seaboard and inwards, okay? And that's when the question came up, what do we do? And that's when the next stage of this PAR process, this Participatory Action Research process was. And we started to bring in many different people from many different areas to kind of talk about what can we do going forward. And one of the things that started to bubble up was that some of these farmers were honestly just looking for a way to monitor so that they knew when they had to say spray if they wanted to spray. If they're organic farmers, they wanted to spray some sort of organic pesticide. They wanted to know when was the perfect time to spray, how many times they had to spray. They wanted to know basically the life cycle of the insect. Okay, so that was one sect of people that we started researching. We started finding out that information. And then the second sect was actually looking at kind of what types of strategies can they use that's not necessarily going to be a silver bullet, but that they can add as part of their IPM program. That was the second phase of it. And then the third phase was who were we going to work with that would be willing to do these experiments on their fields or in their fields. And what that led to was this whole issue around what do I ask as a researcher and what does the farmer looking at as questions to answer. And so what we found out was this is what we were interested in finding out. How did the moth get here? What is the phenology of the moth? What's the life cycle of the moth? How many generations does the moth have? What's the host preference in order of, like, is it leeks, onions, garlic? Does a garlic farmer have to worry as much as is someone who's growing chives or chives is bad? All that sort of stuff, because we thought this would be what was interesting. And what we learned was really, this is what people were interested in. Does the above ground damage, we're seeing lots of damage, does it actually cause below ground yield loss? We might get our onions completely hit, but is that actually causing differences in the size of the bulbs? I didn't even think to ask that question, because I thought if there's damage on top, that's bad, right? And so we're learning actually this isn't a clear correlation. When are the moth populations the worst? We're defining moth populations the worst as the number of adults. Is that necessarily true? If you have a large amount of adults, does that actually mean that there's a large amount of damage that's going to happen? How does that correlate? And then finally, how do I protect my onions? I didn't even have that question. Because I thought by using this basic information that you'd be able to figure that out. No, they want us to test that idea. And I didn't have all that information. And so we started to come up with kind of a suite of different ideas that we could actually institute. Okay? And so it led to some ideas that came out of farmers that wrote down in our information sessions or in our dinners. We brought 3, we're actually having our second reflection dinner this coming January. And a lot of them said, it'd be really interesting if you could use some sort of biological control. And we're like, okay, what kind of biological controls are you interested in? And some of them said, we're interested in nematodes. And what we know is that commercially available nematodes, some people have hit or miss with some of their trials. And this actual moth lays its eggs on the plant. As you know, maybe you don't know, nematodes are found in the soil, and we apply them in soils. So people were asking, well, is there any way to foliar spray them? And so we're kind of in the midst of kind of exploring that idea. This is kind of a locally reared nematode that's extracted from New York soils that we're actually using.
Just, can you make sure you tell people what a nematode is?
Oh, thanks. So who knows what a nematode is?
I do.
What's a nematode?
It's a microscopic word.
And what does it do?
Live in soil.
Lives in soil. And there's certain types that kill insects. You know how they kill insects? Does anyone know how they actually kill the insect? They get inside the spiracles, the breathing holes of the insect, and they have a bacteria that lives in the mouth parts. Well, it actually lives in, depending on the roundworm, actually lives inside it and it escapes out, and that's actually how it kills it. So they get inside the breathing holes and they kill them. So the idea is that they're asking us questions, can we foliar apply these guys in a way that might protect against the leek moth? Then we also started to explore different varietal trials, because people are saying, well, an easy way might do it might be a cultural control, where we can actually kind of look at different ways in which we can just simply select specific varieties. So we've been testing that. And then finally, there is also a generalist parasitoid wasp. So a parasitoid wasp is, in this case, an insect that lays its eggs. It's kind of like alien. It lays its eggs inside either the adult egg or larvae of another organism, and then it eats it from the inside and kills it. It's kind of brutal. But there is, and there's the other thing too, we did not know this, but a farmer told us this, and we're entomologists. Trichogramma, I think, which is a parasitoid wasp that people use basically for corn rootworm, and a couple other. It's kind of a generalist parasite, which is really rare. It'll lay its eggs on top of a bunch of other insect eggs. Two farmers told us, like, you think trichogramma would work? And we went, oh my God, that's such a great idea. Yeah, let's try that. And so we contacted someone in the valley, the Grand Isle, asking them how they use trichogramma to control for corn rootworm. And they basically said, we get it from Canada. And so why do you get it from Canada? Because of the way in which they actually release it is different than the way you release it for corn, so on and so forth. We talked to the people up there, and now they're actually sending us free trichogramma cross lines in order to use in our studies. And so you might be saying, what the hell does this have to do with climate change adaptation? So what does it have to do with climate change adaptation? What do you think? This is completely useless?
No, it's not completely useless. I'm confused why the leek moth doesn't adapt to all parts of the United States. And why is that, like when you did that picture of the United States, that this is where it can live, why doesn't it adapt to take over the world?
Why doesn't it? So that's a perfectly good question. And that comes to the kind of definition of adaptive change. So is every trait on, so for example, why do we have elbows? Why do we have chins? Why do you think?
Bend your arm?
To bend your arm for what?
To feed yourself or survive?
Sure, maybe that's the reason why.
Prove useful over time and increase our fitness.
So it increase over time and increase our fitness. But is every trait in your body an adaptive trait? So meaning that, does your hair color make you, because you have a certain color hair, does it make you more likely to survive or have babies? There's a flaw in the evolutionary thinking that every single trait in an organism is perfectly adapted, and that's why it's there. We tell evolutionary stories all the time. And the reason why there's a fallacy in that is because everything is linked together. If you're going to have one trait and increase it, well, that's going to take away some sort of trait or kind of compromise some other trait inside an organism. And so with regards to the leek moth, to answer your question, there are probably certain traits that if they were to lose, they wouldn't be successful in the other areas. So there's a trade-off there. And the reason why I was even bringing up this entire process is because if we're going to move forward and adapt to these areas and adapt to these new changes in the environment, we're going to need lots of different information, and we're going to need coordination, not from the single side. A lot of people are looking to climate change researchers to come up with the solutions. And what I learned just through this simple process was the fact that had I not had a coordinated research program by which I was learning from farmers were telling me, and then also learning from people who are like soil scientists that I work with, and working from people who actually know the leek moth simply because they're good naturalists, I wouldn't have gotten to this point at all. We wouldn't have come up with any ideas that were of any use. So if we're going to move forward in this climate change adaptation, my suggestion to you guys is to talk to researchers, reach out to researchers, right? Have dinner with researchers. Have dinner with other naturalists that are working in the area. Call out to them, because this unidirectional way of solving problems in this new area of changing environment is not going to work if the idea is to come up with new ideas to solve this new problem with flooding. It's simply not going to be adaptable, because the one thing we know is we need lots of traits to deal with all this change. The way I see research right now, absent of PAR, is essentially a single trait. We believe that we can change one trait, i.e. researchers are going to have the solutions for all the problems that people have on their farm. Extension is going to be the only way to do it. We're going to extend knowledge from the academy to help farmers. No way. That's not going to solve it. That's not enough traits. That's a single trait. And what we know is single trait there's not enough traits in that kind of diversity to actually solve a problem that's as integrated as the environment. So I really encourage you to really, over the next year, if you have a problem on your farm, call up your local university. Say, or whoever's working in agriculture, I have a problem and I want you guys to come talk to me about this, and let's come up with an experiment together.
So is that how you would go about it? Because I'm thinking, how many professors or researchers, are working in agriculture and do have that opportunity, given the fact that they have to find funding from somewhere for their work, and who's funding their work. And maybe, you're lucky enough to work at the University of Vermont that's funding your work. Maybe there's some people at Cornell. Cornell does collaborate. We do collaborate with Cornell. And, is there others that you would suggest? Would you just say call up your university and start asking questions and try to find somebody?
I would say start there, but I would also say that when we started our project, we crowdfunded it. The first leek moth project was actually crowdfunded. We went to a place called Experiment. We were coming because we had farmers coming to us and saying, we want to work with you guys. You guys are interested in doing work with us. How can we help you get funded? And we sat down and we're like, can we crowdfund this? And so we went online and we found experiment.com. We actually crowdfunded the first year of research. It's only $3,000, but it helped us monitor the entire state, and it helped identify what the actual phenology of the insect was before we could even start coming up with ideas of knowing the phenology, what's the next step. So there's many different ways, and if there's anything that a lot of these agricultural grants require is buy-in from farmers, especially your SARE grants. So that's certainly one. There's certainly SARE grants that have technical advisors, which is, from my perspective, doesn't fit this model of climate change. A technical advisor, again, is simply a researcher who's going to tell you what to do. Hell, that's unidirectional, trait-based, kind of from my perspective, not really useful research. So anyways, I've already gone all over my time, but any questions about that? Does that make sense? And how many people are actually doing that kind of bidirectional research with anyone? Is anyone doing that here? You are.
My personal other farmers on this property.
Yeah, I bet you're here, yeah. And then you could work together to find funding. Like it's real. I think that's the answer to adaptation to a changing climate, not coming to a talk to have someone tell you what to do on your farm. I mean, that's just my own opinion, but I have lots of opinions. Anyhow.
The other thing is that contacting people is that you never know when someone is already interested in something. And, people like us usually have our time covered, right? So if it's a local university and someone's interested, they're going to come out. And so you never know, right? Or they might be, or I'm always really swamped, so that's my issue, right? But yeah, if there's an interest, then they might even have funding, But we're really trying to encourage people to reach out and also to pressure, because land-grant universities are supposed to be here for the public good, right? Research is for civil society. That's our mission. And it seems that it's been somewhat forgotten. So, but it is your university, right?
All right. And the last thing I'll add too is that the other reason why I say this too is because there's been the leek moth and swede midge, which I don't think anyone has here in New York yet. They used to be two crops. So swede midge is a midge that infects brassicas. And brassicas and alliums, from my understanding in Vermont, from farmers that tell me this, and Vermont farmers will tell me, used to be kind of really low stress crops. They could do well, you plant them, and now the worry around, not so much alliums, because I still think that there's a window in which we can actually solve this, but the swede midge, essentially, we have no answers for. And had we known earlier, as a community, both farmers and researchers, that this was a problem, we might have been a little bit farther down the road with coming up with solutions. And the problem is, because there's not that two-way communication, that we find out. I walked around a garden knowing that swede midge is a huge garden, a huge community garden in Burlington, and I walked around to each plot to see who was growing broccoli. And basically what happens when a sweet midge lays its eggs, it aborts the broccoli head. So I'd walk around and I saw people growing broccoli without any heads. And I was asking gardeners, and why don't you have any, what happened to your broccoli? And they were like, I don't think broccoli grows well in Vermont, is what I had like 3 gardeners say to me. They had no idea about this pest at all. And it's been here for about 8 years now. And that's a reservoir of the pest in these huge community gardens. Had this communication been more kind of two-way, then these adaptation strategies would be able to be discovered and vetted, and we need to be quick, because if the environment's going to be moving this quick, we need information flowing quickly, and the only way to get information flowing quickly is to have more trust between every stakeholder, but especially between stakeholders that are the farmers, the consumers, and then the researchers who are helping to research these different types of problems. So.
And it seems to me that two of the issues we're looking at now, since they're coming from the north and coming south, might have more to do with global shipping than
Yeah. So they're yep. But again, they're all the same. To me, this problem mimics a climate change. It's a very quick change in environment, whereby people have to think quickly before. For years, they didn't have to worry about this, and now they have to worry about it. It's the same thing, whether you call it climate change or invasive. To me, all those fit in the same way. The way to solve it isn't a specific strategy as opposed to a specific process. And I think that's kind of what we've been learning for the past several years that these guys are going to talk about. So anyways, I can go on forever. So I thank you for your time, and sorry.
That's okay.
You're good. That's great.
So I want to briefly and thus shallowly touch on how beginning farmers fit into this conversation. So we've seen often beginning farmers paired with climate change. And I feel like an underlying tone is that this is disempowering and this is challenging. So what I didn't share within my intro is that I suffer from chronic optimism, so I see some opportunity in this. And I just want to connect where PAR, so Participatory Action Research, climate change, and beginning farmers might be able to intersect. So as was mentioned, Vic talked about Grand Isle a bit. It's in the Lake Champlain Islands of Vermont, and Arbor Farmstead is the farm that I co-own. And this Halloween, we saw that our apple trees went into bloom. And this is really challenging in the beginning farming movement. I feel like many of us are leasing land, so don't have that intimate knowledge and place-based knowledge of what does this mean. So although I felt like this was concerning, I didn't have a greater context of, do these trees always go into bloom on this property? It was only 1.5 years on the property. So I've had, I should define phenology. So phenology is the study of the seasons. So what that can look like in a farmer context is just taking notes on data and seeing how things transition on land that you might be stewarding. I worked with an apple grower in South Hero, Vermont. And a couple years ago, there was this hailstorm that hit the Empire apple crop. And what I was mentioning about the context, he happens to have enormous context. He's the oldest volunteer-based weather observer in northern New York and Vermont. He's been doing so continually for 40 years, every day making note of weather data, bloom time, harvest times. So that's been an incredible resource for me. But stepping back, where does this look like in the PAR piece of collaborating with other farmers and perhaps other agencies like NOAA? We can contextualize and strengthen the data that we have access to. So I feel like some rhetoric I've heard in the beginning farmer community is saying, what do I have to offer? A tremendous amount. You having that place-based knowledge is incredible. The other opportunity I want to talk about, and I was so grateful that Laura touched on this yesterday when we were touring the farm, is pawpaws. What does this mean? So thinking about crop innovation, overall in the United States, we're seeing the movement of hardiness zones. What might have been a zone 4 is going to be a zone 5 in the future, or getting there now. So this historically was the distribution of where pawpaws were native and accounted for by the USDA. I've been doing some garden consultations for a woman in St. Albans, Vermont, and she's rearing these beautiful pawpaws in her backyard and getting to them before frost, which is incredible. So what does this look like? Once again, it can't just be this individual approach, but rather an opportunity to work on PAR. And what that means to me is bringing in the chefs, other farmers, backyard gardeners, but also end consumers to think about how we can innovate and adapt to climate change. And this is what they look like. How many of you all have tried a pawpaw before? Yeah, I find them delicious, and they have this tropical flavor profile that I think is incredible for a place like Vermont. But my takeaway message here is that I hope beginning farmers do react to climate change in a way that is empowering and innovative, and that beginning farmers and farmers in general can offer this incredible knowledge to PAR, and don't be afraid to be the initiator. So going and approaching those researchers with your ideas and making sure that your needs are reflected in the research that comes. I'm a strong advocate for moving away from extractive research. So as Vic was mentioning, a researcher coming onto your farm, taking some data that you're never going to see or benefit from, but rather making sure that's a collaborative process and that your needs and expectations are met. Those are the 3 slides I just wanted to give a shout out to beginning farmers on. Are there any questions on that piece? Great.
Okay. So I like to use these transition slides between people. So I'm going to give you a choice. We're going to make it participatory. I have 2 case studies, and we don't have time for both. So who would like to hear about a recent study we did on resilience internationally with coffee farmers in Haiti, Nicaragua, and Honduras? Or your other choice is to hear about our project, and it was called VAR, the Vermont Agricultural Resilience in a Changing Climate. That started in 2011. And different iterations of it are continuing. So who wants to hear the international one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not a clear, a majority. So I'll do a little bit of both. How about that? What's the time? Can you check my phone?
It's 2:20.
So we were asked by Lutheran World Relief, which is an international development organization based in the U.S., to help them assess the resilience of smallholder coffee farmers in these 3 countries. And this is the kind of partner and in PAR that we really like to work with, because these are the people that are implementing, supporting farmers on the ground to respond to climate change. So the projects that we looked at, 2 of them were explicitly climate change resilience project, and the other one was more focusing on food security, but definitely related. And just so you see how collaborative we try to be, there's a lot of people that were involved in this project, and that can drive you crazy sometimes, but it's also really important, because these are all the players. These are the people that are important that you should be checking in with. And part of the reason we like to work with LWR is that they work very closely with country partners. So they support these local NGOs, and they're usually the ones that lead the project. So I work a lot in coffee and not just on climate change, but climate change is affecting coffee. It could be affecting coffee pretty strongly. And some scientists have done these maps of coffee suitability. And what you see is in the red, in 2050, all these areas in the red that are now producing pretty good coffee are not going to be suitable anymore. So a lot of these are climate models, and these scientists have gone to the farmers and shown them these climate models, which is perhaps a good thing. When we were doing this, a lot of the farmers were like, we're really interested in what you have to say. We don't want to see any more maps telling us that we're not going to be able to farm. And that was probably the first lesson in resilience about beyond the biophysical is the human component, that all of these farmers have a very strong identity linked to coffee. That's their crop. And they're not going to just start thinking about another crop because a map has been shown to them that the coffee is not suitable. And that happens a lot with resilience and adaptation, right? Like human beings, you can tell them, you're not going to be able to grow this here, and they're not going to change. So you have to work with people and meet them where they are. So LWR uses this perspective of resilience. We've been doing some work on resilience, but also there's a lot of controversy about what it really means. So I'm not going to go into it, but notions of bouncing back after shocks and extremes, notions of transformation to a better state, right? So you have the tree, the extreme hazard or shock, and then going back. This actually shows perhaps a transformation because there's a little, sunny and it's a little better state. What happens when you work with certain farmers, certain people, is that they're not really existing in a great state. So when a shock comes and you're talking about coming back, you actually want to be somewhere better than where you were before that shock hit you. So, these are our teams. We worked in Haiti. This John Hayden is actually a Vermont farmer that collaborates with us on a lot of different things, and he happens to speak Creole, so he joined us as the lead of the Haiti team. And maybe just a couple of things that I'll show you. These were the main climate change challenges that these farmers were facing. Drought in Honduras and Haiti was probably the most serious problem that people are facing. Roya is the coffee leaf rust. It's a disease that has always been present in Latin American coffee, but in the last 10 years has gotten really bad. And in 2012, decimated like 80% of the crop. It got really bad. So it's gotten better, and you can see that in Haiti, people didn't see it. That's also because the Haitians have these incredibly diverse systems, and they have low pest pressure in general. And then the other one that they brought up was food insecurity, which, in the US, maybe that's not something that comes up a lot, but the idea was that we really wanted to hear from them, not just say what are the biophysical, what is the soil, tell us the things that you feel you're being really affected by. And the one I didn't include here was the coffee price instability, which is really big for these farmers. What we ended up doing, because we kept hearing this notion of the farmers were not seeing resilience as something just happening at the farm. So we try to combine all these different measurements of resilience, and you can see some financial ones: credit access, profit, market access. This is more about the support networks that people have. So number of support organizations they're connected with. We calculated this network quality more in you can have a lot of connections, but they don't really help you very much. To try to balance these two. Some infrastructure, some notions of their agroecosystem health. And these were what we call human assets. So educational levels and months of adequate household food provisioning. And what's interesting about this graph is seeing that all three sites in general had very strong natural capital. So they have agroforestry systems that are well adapted to the tropics. There was a perception of pretty good soil in Haiti, less so in Nicaragua and Honduras. There's more degradation here going on. And in Haiti, it's interesting because there's degradation around, but not that much in the coffee systems. So the take-home from this case is just resilience is not just about biophysical factors. And something to really think about as you're dealing with your own adaptation is that don't just look at your fields, don't just look at your crops, look at your whole farm operation. Because maybe the financial part is the less resilient one. And that's really where you should start when you start thinking about adaptation. I'm going to keep going here. So VAR we tend to engage in these incredibly crazy, intense initiatives. Stephanie Cesario is here. She was part of this project when she was a student at UVM and was just telling someone oh yeah, I remember those meetings, 20 people and 8 faculty and crazy. But the idea is that we were trying to be transdisciplinary. We wanted to have this being led by farmers, so we created an advisory committee with farmers and extensionists in it that we would consult every so often to hear, do you guys think we're going the right direction? We did a lot of different things. We worked with 12 farms doing on-farm experimentation. We did economic analysis of best management practices. A couple of our colleagues do agent-based modeling, but please don't ask me about that. But it is all interesting, but it's very challenging because when you bring a lot of people in the room with different types of expertise, everybody thinks that whatever they're doing is the most important, and it's just really hard to bring it together, right? So I'm going to share a little bit of information from the farmer survey that we had. The other important piece related to Laura, right? You were talking about, look at all the funding sources. Like this diversified funding pool is what we need to do when we do PAR work. Because some of the things that we're doing were interesting to the Vermont foundations. They really wanted to support training service providers and extensionists on climate change. And the UVM Food Systems Initiative and Extension, they had USDA funding. They were more interested in the research and the hard data. So combining these two so that everybody can get some benefits. So one of the things that we do is we sent out a survey with the National Agricultural Service because they have all the databases of farmers, and they did it in 2 counties in Vermont. And they asked, we did the survey, they implemented it. What are the practices that you're using right now to help you adapt with climate change? And you can see here that the first one is rotational grazing, insurance, so this is what people said, timely manure transportation, conservation of buffer strips, cover crops. So these practices are what are being perceived by these farmers in Vermont as what's helping them deal with this climate issue. Then we asked in interviews, so a little bit more personal, more of a dialogue, both with farmers and service providers. A lot of this work was done by Rachel Chapman, who was a student in our lab and now is an extensionist with UVM Extension. So what are they doing to address it, and how do the perceptions that farmers have match the ones that extensionists have? So that was part of the question here. Oops. Sorry for I misplaced the order, but you can see here the different types of benefits that people assign to each practice. So people were saying, well, rotational grazing has pretty even ecological, financial, and social benefits. So again, this is looking at the practices a little more holistically, and not just saying like, is your practice like helping you produce more and make more money? And cover crops came up pretty high here and also pretty equal. And you can see the others over there. So this is a combination of service providers and farmers. How we got these scores was through this tool that we had actually developed for a different project. And this is a tool that I think anyone can do. Is basically just a table where you have a practice, and then you can put in these attributes that you care about, right? So one of the biggest challenges for us was that these attributes or these variables that define ecological attributes need to come from the farmer, right? If I make them up in my office, they're probably going to be useless. Like it needs to be the things that you care about. And then you can do that for ecological, social, financial, and score them so that you can decide which practices you want to really focus on. And then you start pushing the researchers you call Vic. It's like, Vic, you told me that I could call you and that you would respond and do PAR with me, right? But this is sort of like the scoring. It's a very simple scoring, -2 to +2, with +2 being the highest score. And from these is where we got these. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. How are we doing with time?
About 30 minutes.
Any questions about the 2 projects, International, BAR?
Can you go back to the chart just really quickly?
This one?
The graphic, sorry.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's going to get the slides, right, Laura? The other thing that I will say is the VAR work has been published quite a bit. And one of the things that I'm really grateful to Rachel for doing is that in addition to some of the scientific papers that can be a little bit dense, she's written these research briefs that are more for extensionists. There are like 10 pages, a lot more straightforward. So maybe we'll write our website here in case you want them. You can download them from our website. All right, any other questions? So did you want to see this just to see it, or you want to ask a question?
You got a question?
Just
too?
putting the link.
Yeah.
I just had a question, we'd love to hear a little bit more about how widely practiced the PAR methodology is. Is this something that other researchers around the country are actively using in the same way that you are? Methodology is pretty unique.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw my presentation at lunchtime. So I always say, like, agroecology is not new. PAR is not new. It's been around for a really long time in quite a few disciplines. There is a resurgence right now, and because I think climate change is a great example of why people want to do PAR. There's an urgency, right? Like, if we wait 10 years to really calibrate all the models and then start trying to find solutions, it's not going to work for a lot of people. So there's a lot of interest, and you will hear it called different things. Community-based research is another name, action research. And I would say that there are quite a few researchers doing it at Cornell. So colleague Rachel Besner-Kerr, she's a sociologist, but she does agroecology work. She works mostly internationally. But yeah, and I'd be happy to share more. Who else is doing PAR in the Northeast? There's not that many in the Northeast.
Not formal processes,
Yeah.
but
But it's gaining strength. So one of the things we're trying to do is to push you guys to reach out, because I think that there are a lot of scientists interested but scared of it. So we need to nudge them. And the Union of Concerned Scientists, Ricardo Salvador and Marcia DeLonge, they're really supportive of this. We've done some workshops with them and are trying to push some. It's hard because these processes tend to take more time than doing like straightforward research. And one of the things that I'm doing now that I'm a full professor is trying to nudge the system so that the university also acknowledges this work a little bit more, rather than just publishing a lot of papers that might never really help a farmer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, are you guys ready for some action of your own? How much time do we have?
Just short of 30 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
25 minutes
We have
total.
good. So we're a small group. Oh, look, bailing on the action.
I have to prep for a talk.
We're gonna go find them at Kate Farm.
Bring folks
Thank you for coming.
forward.
Yeah, that was great.
So let's do 2 groups.
sure. Yeah.
I'm gonna count.
Into 2.
Just want to
Are you
divide
sticking
by the
around,
room.
or are you headed out?
So we just
Oh, you
divide by
guys
the room,
just
right?
want to do it
Yeah.
that way?
That
Okay.
makes sense.
Cool. Great.
So here's the activity. Together, you probably want to know who you are and where you're coming from and all that. Try to identify 3, no more than 5 areas that you believe, since you're coming from different areas, not in the context of your farm, but in general, that are challenges that young farmers will face as related to climate change. So 3 to 5. Then who could help you deal with those? Like, let's just say you guys are a team and you're looking for someone to start a PAR process. Who would you reach out to? Obviously, if it's bugs, who would you reach out to? And then what are the key challenges and opportunities that you can see from jumpstarting that process? There's the closest university is 100, whatever, in the next state, or challenges, but also opportunities. So for example, is there a funding opportunity? Is there a funding person that you can connect with to help you find the funding? Who has knowledge? Like Alisha's example of that farmer who's been keeping data, that's pretty amazing. We need to do something with that data, Alisha. Who's a good facilitator that could help you? Like I'm a farmer and I'm really shy, but my friend is not shy at all, so she wouldn't mind reaching out to Vic. Those kinds of things. And challenges also, like there's nobody here, or do I have to reach out to the ALC to actually make this work? Yeah? Clear? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah.